The wrench slipped from Roy Bennett's hand and clattered against the metal deck plating. He wiped the grease from his palms onto his already stained work pants and bent down to retrieve it. Another 12-hour shift at Outpost 7's maintenance bay was nearly complete, and his back reminded him of every bolt he had tightened and every panel he had welded. The mining equipment on this asteroid colony took a beating from the constant drilling operations. Roy had spent the entire day repairing a massive ore processor that had decided to seize up right in the middle of production. The machine now hummed smoothly behind him, its rhythmic pounding a familiar lullaby to his tired ears. He gathered his tools and started loading them into his cart, when a sound cut through the ambient noise of the facility. It was a roar, but not the mechanical kind he was used to. This was organic, desperate, and coming from somewhere beyond the colony's protective walls. Roy paused and listened. The sound came again, followed by another roar that harmonized with the first in a way that spoke of genuine distress. Dragons. Had to be. They shared this sector of space with humans, maintaining an uneasy coexistence that mostly involved staying out of each other's way. His curiosity got the better of him. Roy abandoned his tool cart and walked toward the eastern airlock. The sounds were definitely coming from the canyon system that cut through the asteroid's surface about a quarter-mile from the colony perimeter. The airlock cycled open, and Roy stepped into his environment suit. The asteroid had breathable atmosphere thanks to some terraforming work done decades ago, but it was thin and cold. Better to be safe, he grabbed a portable light pack and headed out across the rocky terrain. The twin suns of the Crimson Drift sector painted the landscape in shades of orange and deep red. Long shadows stretched across the canyon walls as Roy made his way toward the source of the noise. The roaring had stopped, replaced by heavy breathing and what sounded like whimpering. When he rounded a boulder the size of a small building, Roy stopped in his tracks. Two dragons lay in a tangled heap at the bottom of a narrow section of the canyon. Their wings were knotted together in a mess that looked like someone had tried to braid steel cables while blindfolded. The bronze-scaled male was on the bottom, his neck craned at an awkward angle. The silver-blue female was partially on top of him, one of her wings twisted back in a way that made Roy wince just looking at it. Both dragons turned their massive heads toward him as he approached. Their eyes, each the size of dinner plates, tracked his movement with a mixture of pain and something that might have been embarrassment. Roy held up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. He had seen dragons before, of course. They came to the colony sometimes to trade or to use the refueling station, but he had never been this close to one, let alone two that were clearly in trouble. The male dragon tried to speak, but what came out was a confused mix of the clicking language dragons used among themselves and broken human common tongue. The pain was clearly making communication difficult. Roy moved closer, his mechanic's eye already assessing the situation. He walked slowly around the tangled pair, noting how the wing membranes had been folded and twisted through supporting bone structures. It was like looking at a catastrophic failure in a hydraulic system, except these were living creatures capable of ripping him in half if they panicked. The female dragon managed to speak more clearly. "Cannot move, stuck, wings caught." "I can see that," Roy said, keeping his voice calm and level. He had learned long ago that panicking never fixed anything. "How did this happen?" The male dragon growled, a sound that Roy felt in his chest. "Was flying, racing, collision in narrow pass." Roy nodded, understanding dawning. They had been showing off probably and misjudged the tight canyon walls. The impact had sent them tumbling, and their wings had become entangled during the fall. The more they struggled to free themselves, the tighter the knots had become. "Can you untangle us?" the female asked. There was hope in her voice, but also doubt. Roy crouched down and examined the closest knot. The wing membrane was pulled tight between two support bones, creating a loop that another section of wing had passed through. Behind that was another tangle and another. It was complex, but not impossible. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but it's going to take time and I'm going to need to touch your wings." "I'll be as careful as I can, but it might hurt," the male dragon hissed. "You are just human, small, weak. How can you help where we cannot?" "Because I have hands," Roy said simply, holding up his gloved fingers. "And because I spend my days untangling problems. Granted, usually they involve pipes and wires, but the principle is the same." The female dragon shifted slightly, causing both creatures to grunt in pain. "We have no choice, Ash. We have been here for 3 hours. If we do not get free soon, the wing damage could be permanent." The male dragon, Ash, closed his enormous eyes and let out a resigned breath that washed over Roy like a warm wind. "Fine, do what you must, Small Wings." Roy ignored the casual insult. He had been called worse. He pulled off his glove and carefully touched the wing membrane near the first knot. The material was warmer than he expected and surprisingly tough. He could feel the blood vessels beneath the surface pulsing with the dragon's heartbeat. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to them. "Let me get a better look at this mess." He walked around the tangled pair again, this time paying attention to how each section of wing connected to the next. The complexity of the situation became clearer with each pass. This was not something that could be pulled apart quickly. One wrong move could tear membrane or dislocate joints. The female dragon Frost watched him with keen intelligence. "You have a plan?" "Working on it," Roy replied. He stopped at what looked like the central point of the tangle, where both dragons' wings met in a twisted knot that involved at least 6 different membrane sections and 4 wing joints. "But I'm going to need equipment from the colony, and this is going to take most of the night," Ash growled again. "We do not have all night. The elders will come looking for us. Then they'll find me helping you," Roy said firmly. "Because if I rush this, you'll both end up with shredded wings." "Is that what you want?" Both dragons fell silent. Roy took that as permission to continue. He marked the location in his mind, noting landmarks so he could find his way back in the growing darkness. "I'll be back in 30 minutes, he said. "Don't struggle while I'm gone. You'll only make it worse." As he walked back toward the colony, Roy heard the male dragon mutter something in the clicking language. The female responded sharply. Roy smiled to himself. Even across species, some arguments were universal. He had work to do. Dr. Lena Okoye looked up from her microscope when Roy burst into the xenobiology lab. She had been studying mineral samples from the latest drilling expedition, but one look at Roy's face told her that something unusual was happening. "I need information about dragon wing structure," Roy said without preamble. "Specifically, how much stress the membranes can take and where the sensitive nerve clusters are located." Lena set down her sample slide and gave Roy her full attention. "Why do you need to know this right now? It's almost nightfall." Roy quickly explained the situation in the canyon. As he spoke, Lena's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. She pulled up a holographic display showing dragon anatomy, rotating the image to focus on the wing structure. "The membranes are incredibly tough, but only along certain stress lines," she said, pointing to the diagram. "Here, where the support bones connect, there's flexibility. But between the bones, the membrane can tear if pulled perpendicular to these natural fold lines." "What about nerve endings?" "Concentrated here," Lena indicated the wing joints, "and along the leading edge. Think of it like the human fingertip. Very sensitive. Pain signals will cause involuntary muscle contractions, which could complicate your work." Roy studied the display, committing the details to memory. "Anything else I should know?" Lena hesitated. Dragon pride is not a small thing. The fact that they've accepted help from a human means they're truly desperate. But be careful. If you cause them pain, instinct might override their rational decision-making. "Noted," Roy said. He gathered information from Lena's database onto a portable display unit, then headed to the equipment storage area. The colony's supply warehouse was quiet at this hour. Roy moved through the aisles collecting what he needed. Industrial-grade lubricant that would not irritate biological tissue, soft, synthetic rope for his climbing harness, portable lights with adjustable brightness, a medical kit designed for large fauna, cutting tools, though he hoped not to use them. Captain Reeves found him loading everything onto a hover cart. The colony's security chief was a practical woman who had seen her share of strange situations, but even she looked skeptical. "I heard you're planning to climb on top of 2 entangled dragons," she said. "In the dark, alone." "That's the idea," Roy confirmed, checking his equipment list one more time. "That's either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Roy admitted. "But if I don't help them, they could lose the use of their wings. Would you want that on your conscience?" Reeves sighed. "No, but I'm sending a security team to observe from a distance. If this goes wrong, we need to know what happened." Roy nodded. He did not argue. Reeves was right to be cautious. He finished loading his cart and headed back to the airlock. The canyon was dark by the time he returned. The twin suns had set, and the asteroid's thin atmosphere did little to hold heat. Roy activated his portable lights and set them up around the tangled dragons, creating a circle of illumination in the darkness. Both dragons had remained still as he had instructed. That was a good sign. It meant they trusted him at least a little. "I'm back," Roy announced. "Now we can start the real work." He unpacked his equipment methodically, explaining each item as he did. "This lubricant will help me slide the wing membranes past each other without friction damage. This rope is for me to secure myself so I don't fall. These lights are so I can see what I'm doing. And this display shows me where your nerve clusters are, so I can try to avoid causing unnecessary pain." Frost watched him with interest. "You are very thorough for a human." "I'm thorough for anyone," Roy replied. "Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to injuries." He strapped on his climbing harness and approached the central tangle point he had identified earlier. Up close, the complexity was even more apparent. Ash's right wing had somehow folded over Frost's left wing, which had then passed under Ash's wing joint before looping back over. Behind that primary tangle were at least 3 secondary knots that would need to be addressed. Roy pulled himself up onto Ash's broad back, using the dragon's natural ridges as handholds. The bronze scales were warm beneath his hands, radiating stored heat from the day's sunshine. "I'm going to start by identifying every connection point," Roy explained, speaking to both dragons as he would to an apprentice in his workshop. "Once I understand how you got into this mess, I can figure out how to get you out." He worked slowly, tracing each wing membrane from its base to where it connected with the other dragon's wing. He used his portable light to illuminate tight spaces and occasionally applied small amounts of lubricant to test whether sections could move independently. Ash grunted as Roy's hand passed near a particularly sensitive joint. "That hurts." "I know," Roy said. "I'm being as gentle as I can. But I need to know how much each section can move before I start the actual untangling." He continued his examination, and as he worked, the dragons began to talk. Perhaps it was the darkness or the strange intimacy of the situation, but they seemed more willing to share their story. "We were racing," Frost said quietly, "through the narrow canyons west of here. It was Ash's idea." "It was a good idea," Ash protested. "You agreed to it." "I agreed because you said I was too cautious, that female dragons lack the courage for tight maneuvers." Roy listened while his hands continued their work. "So you were proving something?" "Yes," Frost admitted. Ash wanted to show the younger dragons that he was ready to join the hunting parties. "I wanted to show that gender means nothing when it comes to flying skill. And then we both tried to take the same line through a split canyon," Ash said. "Neither of us would yield. We collided at full speed. The impact sent us tumbling, and our wings caught on each other." Roy found what he thought was the key knot. It was located at the junction where Ash's wing joint had somehow become locked behind Frost's wing support bone. Everything else seemed to branch from this central point. "How long have you been flying?" Roy asked, partly to keep them talking and partly because he was genuinely curious. 5 years, Frost said. "Since I completed my first molt." 7 years, Ash added with a hint of pride. "And in all that time, you never saw dragons get tangled like this?" Both dragons were quiet for a moment. Then Frost spoke softly. "Dragons who become entangled usually die. The struggling causes the knots to tighten. Eventually, the wings tear or the dragons exhaust themselves. We are taught from hatching to avoid situations where tangling could occur." Roy paused in his work, the full weight of the situation settling on him. "You're saying this is usually fatal?" "Yes," Ash said. "There are songs about it. Warnings, cautionary tales told to younglings." "Then why didn't you tell me that from the start?" "Because we were ashamed," Frost admitted. "We let our pride put us in a situation that our people consider a death sentence, and then we had to ask a human for help." Roy returned to his examination, but his mind was working faster now. If dragons considered untangling impossible, it was probably because their claws and great strength made the delicate work unfeasible. They could not help but apply too much force, tightening knots instead of loosening them, But human hands were different. Smaller, more precise, capable of subtle movements that dragon claws could never achieve. He finished his survey of the tangle and sat back on Ash's shoulder blade. The bronze dragon turned his head to look at Roy with one enormous eye. "Can you free us?" Ash asked. The earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by simple fear. Roy met the dragon's gaze. "Yes, but it's going to take hours, and there will be moments when I have to cause pain to prevent permanent damage. You're both going to have to trust me completely." "We do," Frost said from beneath Ash. "We have no choice." "Choice or not, I need you to understand something," Roy said firmly. "Once I start the actual untangling sequence, you cannot struggle. If you fight me, even reflexively, someone could get seriously hurt. Probably me, but also possibly you. Can you do that?" Both dragons gave their agreement. Roy climbed down from Ash's back and retrieved his display unit. He made notes and sketches, mapping out the sequence of releases that would need to happen. It was like planning a complex mechanical disassembly, except the parts were alive and capable of feeling pain. He looked up at the dark sky where stars were beginning to emerge. This was going to be a long night. "All right," he said, securing his harness and preparing his tools. "Let's begin." 3 hours into the work, Roy's fingers were cramping and his back ached from the awkward positions required to reach certain knots. The night had turned cold, and even through his environment suit, he could feel the chill seeping into his bones. He had successfully loosened 2 of the secondary tangles, but the primary knot remained locked tight. Every time he thought he understood how to approach it, he discovered another complication. A membrane folded back on itself. A joint twisted at an angle that seemed anatomically impossible. Captain Reeves had arrived an hour ago with her security team. They maintained a respectful distance, watching through night vision equipment. Their presence was a reminder that if something went wrong, help was available. Though Roy was not sure what help could accomplish if a panicking dragon decided to thrash. "Tell me about the Elder Council," Roy said, trying to keep the dragons engaged. He had learned that conversation helped them stay calm, and gave him something to focus on besides his tired muscles. Frost shifted slightly, causing the tangle to creak ominously. Roy paused until everything settled again. "The council governs our people," Frost explained. 3 elders who have proven themselves in combat, scholarship, and leadership. They make decisions that affect all dragons in this sector. "And they're going to be looking for you?" Roy asked, working lubricant into a particularly tight fold. "By now, yes," Ash said. His voice had lost much of its earlier hostility. Hours of forced immobility and shared vulnerability had worn away his pride. "We were supposed to return before dark. When we did not, someone would have alerted the council." Roy nodded, testing the tension on a wing membrane. It gave slightly, which was progress. "What will they do when they find us like this?" "They will be disappointed," Frost said quietly. "Ashamed that 2 of their young could be so foolish." "We are not younglings," Ash protested weakly. "We have earned our hunt names." "Then we should have known better," Frost countered. "And now a human has to fix our mistake." The conversation lapsed into silence. Roy continued working, his movements patient and deliberate. He had dealt with complex mechanical failures before, situations where one wrong move could cause a cascade of destruction. This was no different, except the stakes were lives rather than equipment. A voice called out from the darkness. "Roy, can I approach?" Roy recognized Dr. Okoye's voice. "Come ahead slowly." No sudden movements. Lena emerged into the circle of light carrying a medical scanner and a thermal blanket. "Captain Reeves said you've been out here for hours. I thought you might need this." She held up the blanket. "Thanks," Roy said, accepting it gratefully. He draped it over his shoulders without stopping his work. Lena scanned both dragons with her medical equipment. "Their body temperatures are dropping." "Dragons are cold-blooded, Roy. They need warmth to maintain muscle function." "Can we set up heaters?" Roy asked. "Already being arranged," Lena confirmed. Within minutes, 3 portable heating units were positioned around the tangled dragons, their infrared elements casting a ruddy glow across the scene. The warmth helped. Roy could feel Ash's muscles relaxing beneath him, making the wing membranes easier to manipulate. He returned to the central knot with renewed determination. "This is going to hurt," he warned, positioning his hands on either side of Ash's wing joint. I need to apply pressure here to create space for Frost's wing to slide free. It will feel like I am trying to dislocate your joint, but I promise I am not. The anatomy chart shows there is a 2-inch range of motion that will not cause damage. Do it, Ash said through gritted teeth. Roy pushed, feeling the joint resist, and then gradually yield. Ash roared, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. Roy maintained steady pressure, not backing off despite the dragon's obvious pain. Almost there, Roy said. Just a few more seconds. With a sudden release of tension, Frost's wing membrane slipped free of the joint. Roy immediately released the pressure, and Ash gasped in relief. The worst part is done, Roy assured them both. Everything else should be easier. Frost twisted her neck to look back at the tangle. You did it. I can feel my wing. It has movement again. Roy allowed himself a small smile. We're not finished yet, but we're past the point of no return now. Forward is the only option. He climbed higher onto the tangle, straddling the point where both dragons' wings met. From this vantage point, he could see how the remaining knots needed to be addressed. It was like reading a map, except the map was made of living tissue and breathing creatures. As he worked, Ash spoke. Why are you doing this? Because you need help, Roy answered simply, working another fold loose. But we are not your people. We have never shown humans kindness. Many dragons consider your species inferior. Roy paused and looked down at the bronze dragon's eye. You know, in my workshop, I repair equipment that other people have broken or neglected. Some of that equipment was poorly designed. Some was mistreated. Some just wore out from age. I don't judge the machines, and I don't judge the people who broke them. I just fix what's in front of me. We are not machines, Frost pointed out. No, Roy agreed. But the principle is the same. You're in front of me, you're broken, and I can fix you. That's enough reason. Ash was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Among my people, there is a concept called flight debt. When one dragon saves another during flight, the saved owes the saver a profound debt of honor. I'm not asking for anything, Roy said. That is why the debt is profound, Ash replied, because it is freely given, not demanded. Roy worked through another knot, then another. The sky above was awash with stars, and the distant lights of Outpost 7 twinkled on the horizon. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, guided by hours of experience in tight spaces and complicated problems. Dr. Okoye checked on them periodically, monitoring the dragon's vital signs and bringing Roy water and nutrition bars. Captain Reeves maintained her vigil with the security team. The night wore on. Around midnight, Roy encountered a problem. One of Frost's wing membranes had been folded so tightly that the blood flow was restricted. The tissue had gone pale and cold. If it stayed that way much longer, permanent damage would occur. I need to restore circulation to this section, Roy said, examining the fold carefully. But to do that, I have to partially release a knot that is currently supporting both of your weights. There will be a moment where you both shift positions suddenly. Will it hurt? Frost asked. Yes, Roy said honestly. But the alternative is losing the use of part of your wing. Do it, Frost said without hesitation. Roy positioned himself carefully, bracing against Ash's shoulder ridge. He identified the load-bearing membrane section and prepared to release it in a controlled manner. On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He released the membrane. Both dragons shifted with a lurch that nearly threw Roy from his perch. He grabbed onto the closest ridge he could find, which happened to be one of Ash's wing support bones. The bone flexed under his weight but held. Both dragons cried out. But the shift accomplished what Roy needed. The restricted membrane section unfurled and blood flow returned in a rush. Frost gasped as feeling returned to the affected area. It burns, she said. That's normal, Lena called from below. It is the blood returning. The pain will fade in a few minutes. Roy pulled himself back into position and assessed the damage. The shift had actually helped, loosening several tangles that he had been struggling with. Sometimes chaos was useful. We're close now, he said, feeling a surge of hope. Maybe another 2 hours. Dawn would find them still working, but Roy could see the end approaching. One knot at a time, one careful release after another, he was bringing order to chaos. And in the process, he was learning that strength came in many forms. The first light of dawn painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. Roy had been working for nearly 9 hours, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he was so close now. Just 3 more knots remained, and 2 of those were simple tangles that would release easily once he freed the final primary connection. He was working on that final knot when he heard the sound of wings overhead. 4 dragons descended into the canyon, their massive forms blocking out the rising sun. They landed with ground-shaking impacts, surrounding the scene with expressions that Roy could not read. 3 of them were clearly ancient. Their scales bore the scars of long lives, and their eyes held the weight of years. The 4th was younger, perhaps a messenger or attendant. Captain Reeves and her security team immediately went on alert. Weapons ready but not raised. Dr. Okoye stepped forward, her hands visible and empty. The largest of the ancient dragons, a female with smoke-gray scales, spoke in a voice that resonated through the canyon. "We are the Elder Council. We have come for our lost young." Ash tried to raise his head. "Elder Smoke, we can explain." "Silence," commanded a scarred male dragon with crimson scales that looked almost black in places. "You have shamed yourselves and your families. We will separate you by force if necessary." Roy continued working on the knot, not looking up. "I would not recommend that." The crimson dragon's attention snapped to Roy. "You dare address the council, human?" "I dare to tell you the truth," Roy said calmly, his fingers still moving through the careful sequence of releases he had planned. "These 2 are within minutes of being completely freed. If you force them apart now, you will tear wing membranes that have taken me all night to preserve." Elder Smoke moved closer, studying the situation with keen intelligence. "You have been working to untangle them? All through the night?" "Yes," Roy confirmed. "And I am almost finished, so if you could wait just a few more minutes, that would be helpful." The 3rd elder, a smaller dragon with pale scales almost white in color, made a sound of surprise. "Untangling is not possible. It has never been done." "With respect, Elder," Roy said, finally looking up to meet the ancient dragon's gaze. "I have spent the last 9 hours proving that wrong. Now please let me finish before my hands stop working entirely." Elder Crimson growled, a sound that made Roy's teeth vibrate. "You speak to your betters with insolence." "I speak to anyone with honesty," Roy replied. "And right now, honestly, you are in my way and making this harder." Frost spoke up from beneath Ash. "Elders, please." Roy speaks truth. "He has worked through the night without rest. He has caused us pain when necessary to prevent permanent injury. He has shown more patience and skill than we deserve." Elder Smoke studied Roy for a long moment. Then she stepped back. "Continue your work, human. We will observe." Roy nodded his thanks and returned his attention to the knot. The final release point was tricky. It required him to fold one section of membrane back, while simultaneously sliding another section forward. His hands were shaking with exhaustion, which made precision difficult. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. This was just another repair, just another problem to solve. His fingers found the right grip. He applied pressure in the correct direction. The membrane began to slide. Then a gust of wind came roaring down the canyon, strong enough to buffet the dragons and send loose rocks skittering across the ground. Roy felt his balance shift. His foot slipped on Ash's scales. He fell. The world spun. Roy's training kicked in, and he twisted in midair, trying to angle himself away from the sharp rocks below. He was going to land badly. This was going to hurt. Ash's head snapped around with impossible speed. The bronze dragon's jaws opened and closed around Roy's torso, catching him in midair. The teeth, each as long as Roy's forearm, did not pierce his suit. Ash held him gently the way a mother dog carries a puppy. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Ash carefully lowered Roy to the ground and released him. "Are you injured?" the dragon asked, concern evident in his voice. Roy checked himself quickly. Bruised, probably, but nothing broken. "Thank you." "It is I who should thank you," Ash said quietly. "You were falling because you were trying to save us." Roy climbed back onto the dragon's back, ignoring his protesting muscles. "The job is not done yet. Now hold still. I know exactly where I was in the sequence." He returned to the knot, and this time his hands did not shake. Within 2 minutes, he released the final primary tangle. Frost's wing came free with an audible sigh of relief from both dragons. The remaining 2 knots were simple by comparison. Roy had them undone within 5 minutes. "Okay," he said, climbing down for the last time. "Try moving your wings slowly. Test each joint. Tell me if anything feels wrong." Both dragons carefully extended their wings. The membranes unfurled like vast sails catching the morning light. They flexed and adjusted, testing range of motion. "It feels perfect," Frost said, wonder in her voice. "No pain, full movement." Ash spread his wings wide, then folded them back. Incredible. I thought I would never fly again. Roy swayed on his feet, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Dr. Okoye was at his side immediately, supporting his arm. Elder Smoke approached Roy, her massive head lowering to his eye level. You have done something we believed impossible. You have saved 2 lives that were forfeit by our own laws and understanding. Roy met her gaze tiredly. I just did what needed doing. No, Elder Smoke said firmly. You did what we could not. Our claws are too large, our strength too great. We would have torn them apart trying to save them. But your small hands accomplished what Dragon Might could not. Elder Crimson moved closer, and Roy noticed the ancient dragon's expression had changed. The hostility was gone, replaced by something that looked like respect. Human, Elder Crimson said, and his voice was no longer dismissive. What is your name? Roy Bennett. Roy Bennett, the elder repeated. You have demonstrated something today, something we must consider carefully. The pale elder, Elder Whisper, spoke for the first time. In our traditions, we honor 3 forms of strength. The strength of claw and fire, the strength of honor and courage, and the strength of wisdom and knowledge. We have always believed humans lack the first. They do, Roy said with a tired smile. I would not last 5 seconds in physical combat with any of you. But you possess the other 2 in measures we did not recognize. Elder Whisper continued. And you possess a 4th strength, the strength of small hands that can accomplish delicate work, the strength of patience that outlasts the night, the strength of skills we do not have. Roy was too tired to fully process what the elders were saying. He just wanted to sleep for about 12 hours and then eat an entire meal. But he understood enough to realize that something significant was happening. The dragons were looking at him differently, not with condescension or dismissal, but with something approaching respect. Elder Smoke straightened to her full height. Roy Bennett, the Elder Council, will speak among ourselves. Return to your colony and rest. You have earned that much. Roy nodded, allowing Dr. Okoye to guide him back toward Outpost 7. Behind him, he heard Ash and Frost speaking quietly with the elders, explaining what had happened through the long night. Captain Reeves walked beside him. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I have ever seen. You said that last night too, Roy pointed out. It bears repeating, Reeves said. But for what it is worth, I think you just changed something important. Did you see how those elders looked at you at the end? Roy had seen it, but he was too tired to think about what it meant. He would find out soon enough. Roy slept for 14 hours straight. When he finally woke, his entire body felt like one giant bruise. Every movement reminded him of the night spent climbing on dragon scales and working in impossible positions. He was lying in the colony's medical center. Dr. Okoye sat in a chair nearby, reading from a data tablet. She looked up when she heard him stir. Welcome back, she said with a slight smile. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a cargo hauler, Roy admitted, sitting up slowly. What happened after I left the canyon? Lena set down her tablet. The dragon elders stayed with Ash and Frost for several hours. Then they returned to their settlement. About 4 hours ago, we received a message. The Elder Council requests your presence at their council chamber. Roy blinked. Requests? That is what the message said. They have never invited a human to their council chamber before. Governor Park is quite nervous about it. Roy found his clothes, cleaned and folded on a nearby chair. His body protested as he dressed, but he managed. When do they want me there? This evening, just before sunset. A dragon escort will arrive to transport you. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Governor Park insisted on briefing Roy about diplomatic protocols, most of which involved not offending the dragons. Captain Reeves wanted to send a security detail, but Roy declined. If the dragons wanted to harm him, a few armed humans would not make a difference. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Roy stood at the colony's landing pad. He wore his cleanest work clothes, which still bore a few permanent grease stains. He had considered wearing something more formal, but that seemed dishonest. The dragons were inviting Roy Bennett the mechanic, not some dressed-up pretender. Ash and Frost arrived together, gliding in for a synchronized landing that showed off their fully restored wing function. Both dragons looked healthy and energetic, completely recovered from their ordeal. Roy, Ash greeted him with a dip of his head. We are honored to escort you to the council chamber. I can walk, Roy said. It is not that far to the dragon settlement. Frost shook her head. The council chamber is not in our settlement. It is located in the high peaks where the air is thin and the climb is treacherous for humans. We will carry you. Roy had never ridden a dragon before. He was not entirely sure he wanted to start now, but he recognized the gesture for what it was, an offer of respect and assistance. Ash lowered himself to the ground. Climb onto my back just behind my shoulder ridges. Hold on to the ridge marked with silver bands. That is the passenger grip. Roy climbed aboard, settling into position. The scales were warm beneath him, and he could feel the powerful muscles moving as Ash stood. Ready? Ash asked. Before Roy could answer, both dragons launched themselves into the air. Roy's stomach lurched as the ground fell away. The wind tore at his clothes, and he gripped the silver-banded ridge with all his strength. Flying was nothing like he had imagined. It was faster, more violent, and more thrilling than any simulation or description had prepared him for. The world spread out below them, and Roy saw the asteroid's geography in a way he never had before. They flew for nearly 30 minutes, climbing higher into the mountainous regions that dominated the asteroid's northern hemisphere. Finally, they descended toward a plateau where several dragons were already gathered. The council chamber was a natural amphitheater formed by curved stone walls. Ancient carvings decorated the rock faces, depicting dragons in flight and battle. At the center of the space stood 3 raised platforms where the elders sat. Ash landed gently and allowed Roy to climb down. "We will remain here as witnesses," he said quietly. "You have nothing to fear." Roy walked toward the center of the chamber. Dragons lined the upper edges of the amphitheater, watching in silence. There had to be at least 50 of them, ranging from juveniles to ancient adults. Elder Smoke spoke first. "Roy Bennett, you stand before the Dragon Council, which has not convened for a human in our recorded history. You have been brought here because you have presented us with a question that requires answer." Roy stood straight despite his aching muscles. "What question is that?" Elder Crimson leaned forward. "For generations, we have believed humans to be lesser creatures. Weak in body, brief in life, limited in capability. We have allowed you to share our territories because your technology is useful and your settlements cause us little trouble. But we have never considered you equals. Until yesterday," Elder Whisper added, her pale scales seeming to glow in the fading sunlight. "Yesterday, one human accomplished what we believed impossible. What our entire species has never been able to do," Elder Smoke continued. "We have songs and stories about dragons who became entangled during flight. All of them end in death. It is considered a tragic but inevitable fate. We have never questioned this because our claws cannot perform delicate work, and our strength tears what it tries to save." Roy listened carefully, beginning to understand where this was going. "But you freed them," Elder Crimson said. "Working through the night, you accomplished a task that dragon culture considers impossible. This forces us to reconsider our assumptions. Among our people," Elder Whisper explained, "strength is measured by 3 pillars: the strength of combat, the strength of honor, and the strength of wisdom. We have always believed humans lack the first pillar." "We do," Roy said plainly. "You could tear me apart without effort. Yet you have demonstrated all 3 pillars," Elder Smoke said. "You showed physical strength, not of claw and fire, but of endurance and precision. You showed honor by helping those who could not help themselves. And you showed wisdom by approaching an impossible task with patience and knowledge." Elder Crimson stood from his platform. "Roy Bennett, you have created a problem for our council. We must now decide what your actions mean for our 2 species. Are you an exception? One unusual human with unique skills? Or do humans possess strengths that we have been too blind to see?" Governor Park's voice crackled over Roy's communicator. "Roy, I am monitoring this transmission. Be very careful what you say next." But Roy did not need to be careful. He just needed to be honest. "I am not special," Roy said clearly. "Any decent mechanic could have done what I did. Maybe not exactly the same way, but they would have found a solution. Humans are good at solving problems that require patience and precision. We have to be, because we lack your physical advantages." "So you claim this is a common human trait?" Elder Whisper asked. "Common enough," Roy confirmed. "We build tools because our hands are weak. We develop techniques because our strength is limited. We work together because individually we are vulnerable. Everything about human society is built around compensating for our physical limitations." Ash spoke up from where he stood at the chamber's edge. "If I may address the council, I witnessed Roy's work firsthand. He did not merely untangle our wings. He explained every action. He showed patience when we were difficult. He caused us pain when necessary but warned us first. He treated us with respect even though we had shown him none. Frost added her voice. And when he fell, his first thought upon being saved was to return to his work. He did not celebrate his rescue or demand gratitude. He simply continued the task he had started. Elder Smoke looked at Roy with those ancient, intelligent eyes. If you are not special, Roy Bennett, then what you represent is even more significant. You represent a species that compensates for weakness with skill. That turns limitation into adaptation. That possesses strengths we cannot match, just as we possess strengths you cannot match. Yes, Roy said simply. The three elders looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then Elder Crimson spoke. We must deliberate. Roy Bennett, you will wait here while the council considers what has been presented. The three elders withdrew into a cave at the back of the amphitheater. The assembled dragons began to murmur among themselves, their clicking language filling the air with sound. Roy sat down on the stone floor. His legs were tired, and he saw no point in standing if he did not have to. Ash and Frost moved closer, positioning themselves near him in what might have been a protective gesture. What do you think they will decide? Roy asked quietly. I do not know, Ash admitted. This is unprecedented, but I hope they will see what I have learned. That strength comes in many forms, and intelligence requires recognizing strengths you do not possess. The sun continued its descent. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Roy waited wondering what the dawn would bring. The stars had completed their arc across the sky when the three elders emerged from their deliberation. The assembled dragons fell silent immediately, every eye fixed on the council platforms. Roy stood, his muscles protesting the movement after sitting on cold stone for hours. Ash and Frost moved closer to him, flanking him on either side. Elder Smoke's voice carried across the amphitheater in the pre-dawn darkness. We have reached a decision that will change our people's understanding of the universe and our place in it. The ancient dragon paused, letting her words sink in. Then she continued. For generations, we have measured worth by standards that reflect our own nature. We honor the strength of claw because we have claws. We honor the strength of fire because we breathe fire. We honor the strength of flight because we fly. In doing so, we have been blind to strengths that take different forms. Elder Whisper spoke next. Our stories and songs are filled with warnings about entanglement. We teach our young to fear it, to avoid situations where it might occur. We have always accepted that some deaths are inevitable, that some problems have no solutions. But that acceptance was born from ignorance, Elder Crimson said, his scarred face serious in the growing light. We believed entanglement was unsolvable because we could not solve it. We assumed our way was the only way. Elder Smoke looked directly at Roy. Roy Bennett showed us otherwise, not through grand gesture or mighty deed, but through patient work that lasted through the night. He demonstrated a truth we had not considered. That small hands can accomplish what large claws cannot. That precision can triumph where strength fails. That every species possesses unique capabilities shaped by their own challenges. The elder turned to address the assembled dragons. From this day forward, the dragon people will recognize what we now call untangling wisdom. This is the strength of seeing problems from new angles. The strength of patience over power. The strength of precise action over overwhelming force. It is a strength humans possess in measures we do not. A murmur ran through the gathered dragons. Some seemed confused, others thoughtful. But Roy saw understanding dawning on many faces. Elder Whisper continued the pronouncement. Our teaching stories will be amended. The tale of the Untangled ones will be added to our oral history. Future generations will learn that entanglement is not a death sentence, but a problem requiring help from those with different capabilities. Elder Crimson stood from his platform. And now the council must acknowledge what has occurred. Roy Bennett approached. Roy walked forward, his heart beating faster. He had no idea what was about to happen. The massive scarred dragon descended from his platform until he stood directly before Roy. Then, slowly and deliberately, Elder Crimson lowered his head until his forehead nearly touched the ground. It was the bow of equal recognition. A gesture Roy had seen dragons give only to other dragons of high status. Roy Bennett, Elder Crimson said, his voice formal but genuine. You have shown strength that I did not know existed. I was wrong to dismiss your people as inferior. I bow to the untangling wisdom you possess. Elder Whisper followed, her pale scales catching the first rays of dawn as she too bowed. I bow to the patience that sees solutions in impossibility. Elder Smoke was last. I bow to the skill of small hands that can heal what great claws would tear. Roy stood frozen, overwhelmed by the gesture. These were ancient beings, powerful and proud, acknowledging him as an equal. Then something even more extraordinary happened. Ash and Frost bowed. Then other dragons in the amphitheater began to bow, one after another. The wave spread through the assembled crowd until every dragon present had lowered their head in recognition. Roy found his voice with difficulty. I do not need you to bow. I just did what anyone would do when someone needed help. That is precisely why we bow, Elder Smoke said, raising her head. Because you acted without thought of recognition or reward. Because you treated an impossible task as simply another problem to solve. Because you showed us that worth is not defined by a single measure. Elder Whisper moved closer. We have a proposal for the human colony. We wish to establish an exchange of knowledge. Humans will teach dragon youth about precision work, mechanical thinking, and problem-solving approaches we have never considered. In return, we will share our knowledge of aerial dynamics, territorial navigation, and survival techniques honed over millennia. Some of our young have already expressed interest, Elder Crimson added, glancing at Ash and Frost. They wish to learn to see with mechanics' eyes, as you call it. Roy looked at the two dragons who had started all of this with their foolish race. Both watched him with expressions that might have been hope. I am just one mechanic, Roy said. Teaching would take time away from my regular work. Then we will negotiate with your colony's leadership, Elder Smoke said. Perhaps other humans have skills to share. Perhaps this exchange can grow beyond one teacher and a few students. Ash stepped forward. Roy, you once said you fix what is in front of you. We are asking you to fix something larger, the broken understanding between our peoples. Not alone, but as the first step, Roy considered this. He thought about returning to his workshop, to the familiar routine of repairing mining equipment and maintaining colony systems. It would be easier, certainly, less complicated, but he also thought about the long night in the canyon, about two young dragons who had learned to see humans differently, about ancient elders who had challenged their own assumptions, about the possibility that this small moment might ripple outward into something larger. I will need to clear it with Governor Park, Roy said finally, and I will still need to do my regular maintenance work. But if we can arrange it, I am willing to teach what I know. Frost made a sound that might have been a dragon's version of a laugh. We learned patience from you already. We can wait while you maintain your machines. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the amphitheater in gold and crimson light. The assembled dragons began to disperse, talking among themselves in their clicking language. Roy caught fragments of conversation, his name repeated frequently. Elder Smoke approached him one last time. Roy Bennett, you came to the canyon to repair a tangle. But what you truly repaired was far more significant. You mended a gap in understanding that has existed since our two species first met. I just used the skills I have, Roy said. Yes, the Elder agreed. And in doing so you reminded us that every species has value shaped by their unique challenges and adaptations. That is wisdom we should have recognized long ago. Ash and Frost escorted Roy back to the colony, flying through the morning air with easy grace. As they descended toward the landing pad, Roy could see Governor Park waiting with what looked like the entire colony leadership. This was going to require explanations, probably meetings, definitely paperwork. But as Roy climbed down from Ash's back and felt the solid ground beneath his feet, he felt satisfied. Not because of the recognition or the bowing or the historical significance everyone would surely want to discuss, but because he had solved a problem that needed solving. The rest, whatever it became, would unfold as it would. Thank you for the flight, Roy said to both dragons. Thank you for everything, Frost replied. We will return tomorrow to begin learning if your governor approves. Bring your patience, Roy advised. Mechanical thinking is not learned quickly. Ash laughed, a rumbling sound that shook the ground. We have time, Roy Bennett, and we have learned from you that some things are worth the slow approach. As the two dragons launched back into the sky, Roy turned to face Governor Park and the inevitable questions. But before the governor could speak, Roy held up a hand. Let me get some breakfast first, he said. Then I will explain everything. And trust me, you are going to want to sit down for this. Captain Reeves was grinning. You did it again, Roy. Either the bravest or the stupidest thing possible. Still not sure which, Roy admitted. Dr. Okoye handed him a nutrition bar. How about both? Brave enough to try, and just stupid enough not to overthink it. Roy took a bite of the bar and looked back at the sky where ash and frost had disappeared. In the distance, he could see more dragons flying, their scales catching the morning light. A new day had begun, and with it, a new understanding between species that had lived as neighbors but never truly seen each other, all because a mechanic had treated an impossible problem as just another repair job. Roy finished his nutrition bar and headed toward the administration building. He had reports to file, schedules to adjust, and apparently a teaching curriculum to develop. Just another day's work, really. In his workshop later that afternoon, Roy returned to the ore processor that still needed fine-tuning. The familiar smell of lubricant and metal welcomed him back. His tools hung in their proper places on the wall, each one exactly where it should be. He had just started his diagnostic when he heard voices outside. Young dragon voices speaking in hesitant human common tongue. Is this the building where Roy Bennett works? Roy smiled and set down his scanner. Teaching, it seemed, would begin sooner than expected. He walked to the workshop door and opened it to find 5 juvenile dragons, waiting somewhat nervously outside. They ranged in color from deep green to bright copper, and all of them looked at him with curiosity and respect. I am Roy Bennett, he said. You are here to learn about mechanical thinking? The green dragon nodded. If you will teach us. Elder Smoke said we should bring patience and empty minds ready to be filled with new understanding. Good advice, Roy said. He gestured to his workshop. Unfortunately, the ceiling is a bit low for full-grown dragons, but we can work in the maintenance bay. It is large enough for everyone. As he led the young dragons toward the larger space, Roy felt the weight of what was beginning. This was bigger than fixing a tangle. This was building something new. But like everything else, it would be accomplished one step at a time. One lesson at a time, one moment of understanding at a time. His toolbox sat on the workbench, worn and practical, containing instruments designed for human hands. Soon dragons would learn to see the world through the lens those tools provided. And in turn, Roy suspected he would learn to see the world through their eyes as well. The exchange had begun. Where it would lead, no one could say. But Roy Bennett, mechanic of Outpost 7, had done what mechanics do best. He had taken broken things and made them work again. Only this time, what he had repaired was not machinery but understanding. And that, he thought, was worth all the sleepless nights and aching muscles in the universe.